Hi and welcome back. For the last couple of days I've been forging out some tongs. I only needed a couple of dozen pairs of tongs, so I didn't want to set up my propane forge and drag out my upsetter just for that. So I decided to weld two pieces together. So what I have here is a short section of 1/2 inch round bar welded to the handles, which are 3/8 round bar. And that's basically the same bar stock that I would get out of the upsetting die that I use for small tongs, but for the way the shop is set up now, it was just a more convenient way of getting there. On the left here you can see that I've already forged out that transition. I always do this when I weld tongs together this way because if you ground away too much material or left the weld a little thin, forging it out is always going to reveal a crack or any weakness in that weld. But if you can forge the joint out and it's still solid, then you know you have good welds and you can spend the time on finishing the tongs. These are going along with the forges and the anvils that I recently built for our local makerspace so they can offer basic blacksmithing classes. I only need to make one size of bolt tongs for these classes because all we're using is 3/8 square bar and 3/8 round bar. So by making V-bit tongs, I can hold square bar securely without it twisting around, and the V-bits will hold a round bar very nicely as well. These are bolt tongs and I'm making them exactly the same way that I showed you in my bolt tong video, but I tried to give you some slightly different angles here and hopefully much better shots of what I'm doing so that you can see the process a little bit more, and hopefully things that might have seemed fuzzy in the first video will be a little clearer in this one. When you're forging tongs or anything that needs to be matched up, being consistent is by far the most important thing. So when I set up the first offset, I use the ruler, and you'll see me referring back to this ruler quite a few times during the process. I'm just using the last little bit of the heat here to set up my punch for the rivet hole. Having this set up will really speed up the punching process, and I'm using basically heat that would be wasted if I just returned the bar to the fire at this point. So here's the process up to this point. I'm just using a wider angle here so you can see how my hammering technique looks like when I'm actually working. The important things to notice here is, first of all, my back is always straight. If I need to change the way I'm hammering or position myself differently, I'll do that by adjusting my legs. My back always stays straight and I'm leaning forward slightly, but I'm not bent over. So my back is always in a very strong position. Secondly, and most importantly, my legs are the driving force behind the hammering. I'm lifting my upper body with my legs, and that's getting the hammer moving. And then once the hammer is moving, at that point, I'll lift it the rest of the way. So my arms are really doing very little. Here I'm only using a 2.5 pound hammer, but once I get my upper body moving, that 2.5 pound hammer turns into a 1 pound hammer because that mass is moving upwards. And all I have to do is complete that cycle with my arm. This may look a little weird at first, but trust me, if you're using a 3 or 4 pound hammer and you want to be hammering all day, every day, you need to learn how to do this. Nobody can work with a heavy hammer like that by just lifting it with their arm. I don't care who you are. If you're not shifting most of that workload to your legs, you're going to lose that arm by the time you're in your 40s. Here I'm getting ready to shape the large radius for the tongs. I usually do this on a bender, but if you don't have one, you can set up a simple jig like this. I'm using an insert in my hardy hole because I made this jig for an anvil that has a smaller hardy hole, so I need the insert to make up the difference. I used to set my rivets all in one heat, but every once in a while you would get one that would just start to bend for no apparent reason. So over the years I decided that it was just more efficient to break it down into a couple of different heats. So here what I've done is I've laid the tongs horizontally in the fire, so only one side of the rivet is being heated, and I'm just heading that one side. I'm using my tongs basically as a header, and I'm just setting that one side of the rivet. Now I'm going to take it back to the fire, heat the other side, and repeat the same process. Once the rivet gets upset enough, I can move to a heavier hammer and there's no longer any danger of bending the rivet. But I found this to be just a much more, consistent and reliable way of doing it.